Origin Systems is a fascinating game developer to me. If you were playing computer games in the 80s and 90s, then you probably get it. But other people are going to need a bit of a primer. Origin was a game company built on auteurs. Founded by Richard Garriott, so we've got one auteur right there. Origin existed so that he could control all aspects of publishing the Ultima series. Games that are one of the two pillars building RPGs as a video game genre. Origin couldn't just be Ultima though, and so they started a lot of experiments. And almost inevitably, the games that Origin made were unique experiences driven by one creator's vision. Eventually, this led Origin to publish Wing Commander. And finally, Origin was a bit stable. They had two of the biggest computer game franchises out there. And that's when they started getting a little bit crazy with it. Origin wound up making all of these incredible, genre-defining, technology-expanding, epoch-making games, but for every one they released, there were also 5 fiascos under their belt. On top of that, Origin's project management was even worse than the modern AAA project management. Okay, maybe not that far, but they'd be equal. Game development dragged on for years. Projects would be reworked from the ground up multiple times. The company was notoriously abusive to its employees. That's the environment that Cybermage Darklight Awakening was released in. It's kind of the ultimate Origin side project. Absurdly ambitious. An auteur designer doing whatever they need to. A long development cycle with the tech rebuilt over and over again. Theming that was out of date by the time it reached store shelves. Technology that required high-end hardware for the day and tended to break in awkward ways. An attempt to ride industry trends while also trying to push things in a different direction. Cybermage is a complete boondoggle of a game, and that's what's made it fascinating to me. It's a game with 100 interesting ideas, and 95 of them are poorly implemented. It's not hard to see echoes of modern game design in Cybermage, but you can also see why it took several more years for people to figure out how to do these things well. If you, as a modern viewer who had never heard of Cybermage before, try to go back and play it, you're almost definitely going to bounce off it really hard before you even get halfway through the first map. It's a game that actively works against you playing it. But that's why I'm here. Cybermage is a game that's held my attention for 30 years. I've started and stopped a version of this video 4 or 5 times before I made this one. Cybermage is a case of a game that isn't good, instead it's interesting. And those are the best games to talk about. The starting point for Cybermage is the other pillar of video game RPGs, wizardry. Virtually every RPG that you'll play with a computer or game console can trace its roots to Ultima, wizardry, or both. As a franchise, wizardry had a problem. After Wizardry 4, its creators had a falling out. That is its own story with weird industry-shaping consequences. But what's important for us is that Wizardry 5 got a new designer, D.W. Bradley. He handled the design of Wizardry 5, 6, and 7. And these games, 7 in particular, took Wizardry to new heights. And then after Wizardry 7, Bradley left the company. The ongoing dispute between the original creators of the Wizardry games had escalated to legal action, and Bradley was being pulled into all of it. It created a perfect situation for Origin to pick him up. The creator of the recent popular Wizardry games joining the creators of Ultima? That's a recipe for success. The game that Bradley pitched to Origin was something right in their wheelhouse. An action-driven game designed like the new hot first-person shooters that you saw everywhere, but pulling in a lot of design elements from RPGs, where action wasn't taking place in mazes of hallways, nor instead in realistic environments. They had both the technology and experience to realize Bradley's vision. To guide the project, Origin assigned Warren Spector to produce Cybermage. Spectre had become one of the guiding forces at Origin in the early 90s, guiding some of their most beloved games. Cybermage would be the last project that Spectre worked on at Origin. After this, he'd leave the company and start his own development house, which would eventually become part of Ion Storm and create Deus Ex. Spectre had the perfect engine to build Cybermage on. He had run the Origin side of the project for Looking Glass's games Ultima Underworld, Underworld 2, and System Shock. Each of those were built on the same engine, getting iterated one step further every time. So in the original Underworld, which came out before Wolfenstein 3D, you had slopes, flowing water, lots of object interaction, and a handful of truly 3D rendered objects for situations like having a bridge that players could go over and under. System Shock brought in a better lighting engine and significantly improved event handling. That meant more interactive environments, plus better ways to integrate the game's story into the gameplay. Cybermage was positioned as the follow-up to System Shock. Not truly a sequel, though Cybermage is set in the same world as System Shock. It was more that it was intended to be the next evolutionary step. The game that took the interactive worlds that Origin had been pioneering and brought them to the next level. Something important to understand about Cybermage before I get into the game itself is that in 1995, technology was not standing still. By this point, computers were fast enough that you didn't have to be a tech genius to make a first-person shooter, and there was an enormous amount of experimentation happening. People were integrating more interactive elements, or features that would change up gameplay a bit. Some newcomers to the genre were using magician's tricks to make their games seem more expansive. In 1995, a full 3D engine would be a little bit on the slow side for an action game on the PC, especially one with as much detail as first-person shooters were calling for. But people were doing things like using 3D models in a limited capacity, or connecting map sections with overlapping geometry to create the illusion of 3D space. And when you combine that with just moving the player between different sections of the map where you made the geometry match exactly, you could create a much more convincing world while not having to do all of the math on the 3D rendering. That's the world that Cybermage was coming into, and it was taking on the lessons from 3D Realm's build engine, as well as other advanced games, and using those tricks to create a more convincing world. Its weakness, unfortunately, was that it was still built on technology from 1992. The engine used in Ultima Underworld and System Shock defined environments on a grid. Now, it didn't have to be perfectly blocky. Right back to the original Underworld, walls would sometimes cut across that grid diagonally, but everything was still locked on a grid. Cybermage added a few more angles to the available geometry, but it was just as restricted in how levels could be laid out. And those blocks tended to be very visible. In 1995, deep into the era of Doom, this felt primitive. Cybermage wound up having a lot of advanced features for first-person shooters, and then wrapped them up in very primitive level geometry. That wasn't the only aspect of Cybermage that was a few years out of date when it reached store shelves. Cybermage was promoted as a fantastic comic book adventure, and that is going to require its own explanation. I'll keep things simple since this video is about Cybermage and not the history of the comic book industry. The important thing to know is that when Cybermage was being pitched, comic books were big, and there was a gold rush to them. After some particular circumstances led to some people making a very large pile of money in comic books, anybody who could get a printing press together thought they could do the same. Hundreds of small comic book publishers popped up overnight, and for every cartoon books that had a bone, there were a dozen mule hide books that had a poison elves. And for everyone who just went, "What?" when I mentioned that, I picked them because they were actually kind of successful at the time. In the early 90s, people liked to say that comic books were growing up, but it really felt more like they were entering their angsty adolescence. The power fantasies became more angry. The art was drawn specifically for 13-year-old boys. Fantasy gave way to grime. A lot of comics in this period were put out by people who just weren't very good writers. Comics that piled on confusing exposition and backstory while ignoring minor things like characters and plot. Writers who thought that concept was all you needed for a story. Which of course doesn't mean there was nothing good out there, just that there was a fire hose of slop, to use the modern phrasing. That's the environment that Cybermage the comic book adventure was conceived in. It would even have its own comic series from Eden Matrix Press. That was a comic imprint born from an early internet service provider in Austin. And the only comic they ever published was one issue of Cybermage. Yeah, in between the time that Cybermage was pitched and Cybermage reached store shelves, the comic book industry collapsed. The reasons for this are so complicated and so stupid that I'm not even going to start to get into them. What matters for Cybermage is that when it reached stores in December of 1995, the taste for its style of comic book adventure was long gone. And among the comic book fans who remained, the people they were trying to appeal to, that style was a target of mockery. A perfect example of this is that you could get an ashcan version of Cybermage No. 1. Originally in the 1940s, ashcan versions of comics were ones printed in small quantities to do things like lock down trademarks. They were intended to be thrown away, so they were called ashcans. Well, those became rare special versions of comics, and so in the 90s, it kind of got revived, except now they were being sold to people as special versions that would definitely go up in value. For Cybermage No. 1's ashcan, it was sold with a demo for the game, and that demo is its own weird special thing that I'll come back to. The comic was about half-sized and printed in black and white. All part of how Cybermage was trying to ride the comic book boom, but came out after the comic book bust. While I don't have a lot of information about the process of developing Cybermage, all of the previews and interviews from the time are just fluff pieces, and as far as I can tell, neither Bradley or Spector have ever talked about it. But it isn't hard to imagine that this was not a happy project. Spector had one foot out the door at Origin. Bradley never worked with the company again afterwards. And the date of the final build is November 29th, 1995. A date that means they absolutely shoved this out the door for Christmas. Computer game distribution was fuzzy in those days, but that build date means Cybermage reached stores in the first week of December. Cybermage is lacking a lot of polish. You're going to see a lot of little things that are off with the game that a development team with another few days or weeks could have easily cleaned up. Cybermage was never patched. I'm playing off an original CD that I purchased back in 1996, and that is the only version of the game available. The rights to the game seem to be divided between Bradley himself and Electronic Arts, and for a flop like this, no one's really interested in sorting things out to make it available for modern players. So if for some reason you want to try this, you'll need to get your own CD. Or, set sail on the high seas. I won't tell on you if you choose that option. Inside the Cybermage box, you'll find the manual, a quick reference card, the CD of course, and Cybermage No. 1. And since the story of that comic takes place before the game, that's where we're going to begin. The comic was written by Aubrey Macaulay, drawn by Ashley Underwood, and inked by Chad Townsend. These are not names that you would know even if you were a comic book fan. Underwood was the most active of those three in comics, and she primarily worked as a colorist on some small press stuff. But as a video game connection, she did color the first issue of the Primal Rage comic. I bet you didn't even know there was a Primal Rage comic. In Cybermage issue 1, the inside cover spent a lot of time telling us what a genius D.W. Bradley is, and then the story begins with 4 text-heavy pages giving us the totally irrelevant history of the previous 40 years leading up to the cyberpunk dystopia. Besides corporations taking over and the entire planet in a constant state of guerrilla war, Genetic engineering has created superhuman animal-human hybrids, and there are psychic powers. Then things move on to our nameless hero walking through the future city, where he spots one of those genetically engineered people getting into a car and thinks about how much he hates them. But then our hero spots a sniper on a nearby rooftop and pushes the cat guy out of the way. Our hero is mortally wounded, but the cat guy wants to save him, so the two head off to a secret laboratory where the hero is patched up and gets a giant red crystal embedded in his forehead. It'll take months for the hero to recover from this process, and just as he's about to wake up, the lab is attacked by a military force that kills everybody. They're led by a scary guy who has his own forehead crystal, and they don't manage to find our hero, because he's below the lab in a tube. The hero's head crystal ignites, blows up the tube, and he is reborn, and that's where issue 1 ends. It tells us to look forward to issue 2, but there is no issue 2. On the other hand, the areas in Cybermage are broken up by comic book issues, so maybe the first stage is issue 2? As a comic, this isn't very good, obviously. You'll notice that nobody is given a name, and the actual story of the comic has nothing to do with all of the exposition given at the beginning. In fact, only one name from that exposition comes back in the game, and it doesn't really matter. The art is competent, given how little they have to work from with that script, but it's not outstanding. Maybe the worst thing for the comic is that all of the important story beats are in the game's introduction. That introduction even uses some panels from the comic.
I want you to tear this place apart.
It seems like forever. Waited so long. I feel my pulse quickening, surging through me in jagged waves.
I am reborn!
Before we start a new game, there's two things on the main menu that you should see. The first and worst is the options menu. You'll note that there are no video options other than the gamma. The game's resolution is set when you install it, and I mean install it. Once the game is installed, you can't change the resolution. If you want to do that, then you have to go back to the CD and install it again. I'm playing in the high-res mode, which means that the game is displaying at 640 by 480 resolution. The real problem with the options are the choices for your control scheme. Mouse does not mean mouse look. It means rotation and movement forward and backward. And I know how insane that sounds, but that was how mouse controls worked for a lot of first-person shooters at this time. So you'll probably want to play with keyboard controls, but you'll want to remap them to something normal. When you go to remap the keyboard, you'll find that only about 1/3 of the game's functions are available to be remapped, and those do not include the movement keys. On top of that, you can't change the keys that you are allowed to remap to overlap with one of the functions that aren't listed on this screen. Which ones are those? Well, you should check out the keyboard reference guide that came with the game. The result is that you can't make a comfortable control scheme, and it will always be overly elaborate and uncomfortable. You also can't set things up to allow any kind of fine control, something that becomes a major problem with Cybermage's combat. One more thing on the options menu. This is where you go to set the difficulty. I'll be playing the game on the medium difficulty, which is brutally and unfairly difficult. If you choose to play Cybermage, there is absolutely no shame in turning down the difficulty. A feature you might overlook on the main menu is training. I mean, that just has to be a tutorial, right? And actually, no, that's the game's demo. In 1995, it was pretty common to give away a significant chunk of the game as a demo. The shareware model had proven to be very successful for some people, and so game publishers started thinking, maybe we should give players a unique, few-hour-long experience as a demo. And that's what happened with Cybermage. The demo is just one map, but a Cybermage map is a bit different from a standard first-person shooter map. Practice mode will take you about an hour to an hour and a half, and it is a microcosm of the entire game. The map is divided up into several segments that resemble different parts of the main story. Almost every weapon, power, item, and system in Cybermage is found somewhere in the map. Just about the only thing it's lacking are story scenes, although there's a brief message from the villain if you reach the end of practice mode. I'm not going to drill down into this practice mode, because we're going to get enough of that pretty soon. Just know that if you play Cybermage, there's an entire additional 10% of the game hidden in the main menu. And with that, we'll hit New Game and start really playing. The loading screen lets us know that this issue of the comic is called Escape from the Lab. At least some of these get better later on. Now, the premise of this first stage is that you've just broken out of your tube. You need to make your way up to the lab area where soldiers are attacking, and then escape into the nearby city. And this first stage is a perfect example of why Cybermage's level design is different. There's only about a dozen maps in the game, and these are not your standard 90s FPS, rush in, blast everybody, get out in 5 minutes levels. The best way that I can describe Cybermage's stages is that they're designed like RPG dungeons. Not really a big surprise considering D.W. Bradley and Warren Spector made this game, and the first-person shooter evolved from those RPG dungeons. But it is a very different design philosophy than you were seeing in first-person shooters at the time. Let's do a quick comparison with the first stage from Dark Forces. It was released a few months before Cybermage, used some of the same technical tricks as Cybermage to make the levels more expansive, but the level design philosophy in Dark Forces is very standard 1995 first-person shooter. The level opens with you getting dropped into a room that has a few weak enemies to blast, a quick weapon upgrade, and then you step through a door into a larger area, something that was an impressive technical feat at the time. And when you cross the way through another door, you go up an elevator and shoot a guy to collect a red key. With the key in hand, you go back into the first building, take an elevator up, and press a button to open a passage on the other side. From there, you drop down, head down some stairs, and you enter the room with the Death Star plans, which are your mission goal. Once you've grabbed them, you exit through a side door, take an elevator up, and you're at the mission exit. There's a few side areas you could have gone to, but the area is relatively small, something that even a regular player could run through in a few minutes if they knew the path. And there really isn't much in the way of environment variety. You've got that indoor-outdoor transition, but that's it. The level path is relatively linear. There's one point of going out and getting something, then backtracking. There aren't any puzzles, but in fairness to Dark Forces, there are a few on later stages. Storytelling is almost entirely restricted to between-level cutscenes, with the exception of when you pick up those Death Star plans, you say one line. And the progression through the stage is pretty gentle. There aren't any big set-piece fights or encounters. Now, I didn't say any of that to insult Dark Forces. It's a very good 1995 first-person shooter. It's just that with its level design, Cybermage is trying to be something more. Sometimes it succeeds, sometimes it fails. And the first stage is a perfect example of how complicated Cybermage gets. So let's drill down deep into how the stage plays. The level opens up in a lab room where you've just burst out of that cylinder that we saw in the opening. And opening the exit up takes you into a cave system. Right now all you can do to attack is punch and shoot some weak fireballs. Climbing up the catwalk takes you to another cave chamber where you can snack on a tasty blue ghost, and that triggers the first conversation.
You have awakened. I am Earth Mother, daughter of the Dark Light.
This is Earth Mother, who's going to rattle on for a long time about a bunch of words that make no sense, but you just know they'd be capitalized. You've got your Dark Light, and it's part of the Mara Tak Mang, and there's a bad guy named Necrom, and the Mara is light and the Mang is dark, and you're the one who will bring balance to the Force. The key here is you're getting all of this exposition delivered to you, and you're free to wander around. You can't leave the chamber, the door is locked. But you're not fixed in place. Once Earth Mother finishes her 7 paragraphs of exposition, it's all transcribed in the strategy guide so I could count them easily, you can go explore more of the cave. There's a low passage here that you can pass through and collect an upgrade to your melee fighting. And after a bit of fighting with some zombies and some soldiers, you can get access to the lab complex. But first you have to hit a button and get a message from the person who put the crystal in your head. He just tells you that they're under attack, and then you hear him get captured. And now that you're in the main lab complex, the level gets much more complicated. There are many branching paths that take you to rooms where you can get more equipment. Many of these are technically optional, but you're still probably going to want it in order to survive. One area where Cybermage follows the design philosophies of 1995 is that this is a game that expects you to save early, save often. Being on medium difficulty means that I get melted in a couple of seconds if I look at someone funny. There are encounter bottlenecks where you are expected to just keep throwing yourself at them until you somehow manage to get through. Now, I wasn't trying to play perfectly. As long as I survived an encounter and felt I had enough resources to be able to keep going, then I just rolled with it. But leaning on that save and load is really the only way that you're going to make it through the game. Your first goal in the lab complex is to locate a key. It's not called a key, and this isn't a game where every level has a red, blue, and yellow key that you hunt for. But key hunting is a primary thing that you're going to be doing, it's just all the keys have different sci-fi names. Once you have your SIP decoder, aka the key, you use it to enter a hangar and the first really tough set-piece battle of the game. This room with a broken catwalk in it has way more enemies than you can effectively deal with, but you still have to get through it. Once the big fight is complete, you head down one path from that catwalk, back into a lab area where they are holding the guy who put the crystal in your head. He gives you the security pass to get out of the hangar, and if you can survive long enough to get around things, there's an unoccupied tank. Now you're in the driving segment for this first level, as tanks and large formations of soldiers will come at you. After you've cleared them out, you can go to the control room and talk to that little guy one more time, and he'll tell you to take the sewer exit. So now you can open the maintenance door and head into the sewers. The sewers have their own tunnels branching off of them, and you have to explore these looking for the pieces that you need to raise a bridge in order to reach the exit. You fight more zombies and giant slugs, and the zombies have now learned a damage over time move. And if you survive and explore well enough, then with the bridge raised, you just have to follow the path out. The area transitions are always these weird bars, so keep an eye out for them. Now, as someone who's played Cybermage before, but not recently when I was recording, this entire process took me an hour and 6 minutes. As part of an experiment to see if I felt a speedrun of Cybermage would be interesting, it took me about 10 minutes to complete the first stage. And most of the rest of the levels are similar. A lot of circular paths that feed back on each other, finding shortcuts between different locations in the level and opening them up. You have multiple objectives and they often change mid-stage. As we move into the next area, or the next issue of the comic, which was given the title A Hot Time in Slumtown Tonight, I need to start talking about the game mechanics, because Cybermage has a lot of them, and they are not straightforward. In terms of surviving, you have your health bar, and you have your armor. And armor is divided up into 6 different parts. As near as I can tell, and it's tricky because this is not explained in the game, manual, or guidebook, armor reduces the damage you take to your health at the expense of taking damage to the armor. If the armor goes away, then you take full damage to your health if you get hit there. If you've been watching the screen and not just listening, then you've noticed the blue ghosts that pop up whenever I kill something. That's the soul leaving their body, and you can eat those like popcorn. But it's only floating there for a few seconds before that person's soul goes to its eternal reward. So you have to move fast if you want to consume the essence of everything that they were and turn it into a power-up. You get 4 different things from consuming souls: health and power, which restore your HP and MP, and then life and manra, and these are permanent increases to your maximum HP and MP. With a 50% chance of getting a permanent upgrade every time you kill something, you are incentivized to go on a murder spree. With roughly 100 enemies per map, and a dozen maps in the game, the law of large numbers ensures that your maximum health and power will progress at about the same rate. Mainly it's going to come down to, are you killing everybody and swallowing their souls? If yes, then you'll have more than enough health and power at the end of the game. If no, well then things will get a little bit more dicey, but you could still pull through. There are friendly characters in the game, and you can kill them if you want to, but they'll release a brown ghost when they die, whether or not you were the one to kill them, and that brown ghost takes away things. Previews said that you'd have moral choices in the game, and that seems to be the sum total of them. You can shoot random people on the street and get punished for it. You can't shoot anybody important. All the characters who deliver plot exposition are indestructible. But there are hostile characters who talk, and you can kill them mid-sentence.
Look what just crawled up out of the...
Slumtown consists of a maze of alleys, ladders to rooftops, and apartment buildings to search. You can meet a friendly rebel who will help you out in Slumtown, and he has the exact same sprite as the ruffians that attack you. That is a bit of a consistent problem in Cybermage. There is a lot of sprite reuse, and they don't even change the palette. Sometimes you'll just encounter somebody who looks identical to the previous dozen people you killed who only took one shot each, and their hit points are more like a boss. They look the same, so you approach with the standard tactics, and then wind up over your head because it turns out they weren't just another punk. And friendly conversationalists can look exactly the same as people who can blast through your thick armor in one shot. This is one of those things that I think would likely have gotten fixed if Cybermage hadn't been pushed out the door for Christmas. Even if all they did was change the sprite color, it still would have been an improvement. Your goal in the slums map is to get out of the slums, and the only exit for that is through the arena. You'd think there would be some other way in and out of the city, but no, anytime somebody wants to go get groceries, they have to fight in the arena. To get into the arena, you need $2,000. And there's only two ways that you can make money in Cybermage. Gambling, which isn't accessible until after you beat the arena, and picking it up off the ground. So you need to break into the houses of people who are barely getting by and steal all of their money. Possibly murdering them when they try to stop you from doing this, and then eating their souls. You know, I'm getting a distinct impression that you might not be a good guy in this game. You'll have to do a bit of platforming to access some apartments, jumping from rooftop to rooftop. And this is another oddly implemented feature of Cybermage. The jump button is also the button to activate the mouse interface. You can rebind jump to something else, but it carries that mouse interface function with it. So if you're standing still and hit the jump button, a bunch of icons appear. You have to be moving and then hit the jump button if you want to do any platforming. And you have to do a lot of platforming in this game. As long as I'm on vertical movement, there's another weird thing to talk about. If you approach a ladder and you're lined up just right, you get sucked up the ladder automatically. But the slightest change in angle or position makes you fall back down to the ground. And sometimes that shift occurs automatically as you're going up. So you can just get pulled up a ladder and then fall off. Ladders were one of the big challenges of first-person shooters in the 90s, and Cybermage did not manage to solve that problem. After you've stolen enough money and paid your way into the arena, you have to fight the boss, which is just a big version of the guys you've already been fighting. Killing him opens the exit where you can get out to the city. But before you go, if you turn around, there's a spectator spot in the arena, and you have a terminal there where you can bet on fights. And this is by far the most efficient way to get money in the game. And if you play this game, I strongly recommend sitting here and betting all of your cash on fights over and over again, saving before you place the bet, and reloading if you lose. The betting interface automatically flips back and forth between the boss and 3 normal people, and who wins or loses is actually pretty even in these battles. You're going to need around $200,000 if you want to be fully decked out for the rest of the game. You can get by with less. In fact, I did it with less. But I was also really squeezed on resources at the end. So go nuts and exponential growth your cash until you're ready to move on. That brings us to our next map, which the comic cover tells me is Nightlife in the Big City. And believe it or not, but that woman on the cover is actually wearing more clothes than she is in the game. The city acts as the hub area for most of Cybermage. It's the one region that has shops, and there's a lot of exits to different maps. It's usually possible to go back and forth between maps, though there are a few points in the game where after you pass them, you can't go back anymore. So if you start to run low on cash, you can go back to Slumtown and bet on the arena some more. Necrom is attacking the city looking for you, and he's locked up all of the cops in their own station. Yeah, despite Necrom being a cyberpunk corporate CEO, plus evil magic man, the police aren't on his side. When you emerge from the tunnel, you're in a war zone. You are right in front of the fortified police station, and trying to escape through the streets will just run you into more soldiers. Not to mention the armed flying police cars gunning you down. If you try breaking away in any of those directions, you're probably dead. But you can run into a bar that's around the corner. And here a woman, who shares her sprite with all of the civilian women in the game, lets you know that there are some people who are looking for you to help you. And that gets you a pass card for a nightclub. The three shops in the city, which you'll have to wander around to find, are a weapons store, the hospital, and an armor shop. The armor shop is especially tricky to locate, since you have to go to a back street, open up a glass tube, then take a couple of elevators up and around, and then eventually get to the armor shop. So with a weapon shop where you can purchase ammo for everything, and all of the weapons except one, and the missing weapon is kind of a mid-range thing, not even one of the strong weapons, I think it's time to talk about weapon combat in Cybermage. There are two ways to injure people in Cybermage: use your powers on them, or hit them with a weapon. Okay, enemies can also hit each other, but I think that counts as a weapon. There are 13 distinct weapons in Cybermage, and this is one of those games where different enemies have different weapon vulnerabilities. You have to hit armored things with explosives, fleshy targets tend to take more damage from bullets than energy weapons, and the opposite is true for robots. Weapons all have a damage range that really feels like an RPG die roll, and most of the weapons have some kind of splash damage, the exceptions being melee weapons and the basic pistol. The difference between a direct hit and a near miss is huge with everything else. A near miss is usually about 1/4 the damage, and then a little bit further away than that, and they still take damage, but almost none. You've probably noticed, if you've been watching your screen, that a lot of my shots tend to go through people. Cybermage requires that you hit pretty much dead center for it to count. Anything else and you've essentially fired through their armpit. You just have no precision with your guns either. There's no crosshair, and you just don't have any fine control, whether by turning or sidestepping. Cybermage is a game that demands precision, and then doesn't give you the tools to be precise. To briefly talk through the weapons, the melee weapons are all terrible, effectively unusable. If you're running up to hit somebody with something, you've already been shot twice. And as I've mentioned, the damage that you take is extreme in this game. On top of that, the melee weapons do effectively no damage. They are significantly weaker than your ranged weapons and powers. Even the ultra-secret super weapon that you find right before the final boss by solving 3 puzzles and then fighting 3 mini-bosses simultaneously is a terrible weapon. That super sword does 12 to 30 damage. The second gun that you find can do 12 to 36 damage. So in conclusion, don't use melee weapons. Among the regular guns, you have 3 that hit instantaneously when you pull the trigger, and these are really good for just clearing out normal enemies. The plasma gun shoots giant energy balls that obstruct your vision, even though they only hit at the dead center. It's also the last weapon you're going to get because it's the only one not sold in the store. The rocket launcher does exactly what you'd expect, and the fusion gun fires smaller energy blasts, and it's so ineffective that I really question if it works at all. The best gun to have, but not the best weapon, is the heavy blaster machine gun. It fires big chunky bullets that kills all but the strongest enemies in one blast. It is very expensive, and the bullets are very expensive, but it will carry you through the majority of the game. Finally, there are the two thrown explosives, grenades, which don't throw very far, and then the hover bombs. And the hover bombs are by far the strongest weapon in the game. You don't even have superpowers that are half as effective as the hover bombs. Hover bomb damage is 50% higher than the next strongest attack, and you can only shoot that next strongest attack about 10 times. You get 100 hover bombs. If the heavy machine gun can carry you through half the game, the hover bombs can carry you through the other half. My biggest regret when I was playing for this video was that I did not turn around right before the last point of no return and stock up on another 100 hover bombs. They would have trivialized the end game. Okay, back to the city, and right outside the weapons shop there's a news kiosk playing stories, and one of those stories tells you that Trioptimum Corporation is having some trouble with their new mining station at Saturn.
Tensions have been growing recently between StarCorp and potential partner Trioptimum.
That station is where System Shock is set. So while you're fighting the CEO with a magic gem in his forehead,
Showdown. I re-examine my priorities and draw new conclusions.
But back to our problems here on Earth. If you go to the nightclub, the women there will tell you that the resistance is gathering in a nearby park. They want to use an armored hover car to break into the police station. You'll get over to the park just in time to find that they've all been gunned down by Necrom's soldiers. One of them will tell you about the guy who has the armored hover car, and he'll give you a pass to enter his nightclub. Yes, we're up to 3 nightclubs, and there's 2 more in the city. Okay, so now you get to borrow his car and fly it around. You'll probably notice that the car moves extremely fast, and this was a problem even when the game was released. The vertical controls for the car just make you shoot up and down really fast. With the hover car, you can get over the fence at the police station, and you probably want to kill everything on your way in. Entering the building will take us to our next map, where the comic book is titled, "Where's a Cop When You Need One?" On this map, almost all of the police are locked up in the holding cells, and you need to free them. There are a few that are being held at other locations, and of course you'll need to get something from them to unlock further progress. The police station is the most sprawling, complicated map yet. As you poke through things, you'll find a disc for controlling the robots, and you'll get told that the only open way back into those security cells is through the Jump Boots training course. And those bring me to the topic of inventory management in Cybermage. When you're using keyboard controls in Cybermage, you hit F1, F2, and F3 to change what you're doing. F1 is for weapons, F2 is for powers, and then F3 are for the usable items, the others. So for some puzzles, like shutting down the robots, you'll get a couple different discs, find the terminal, and then hit F3 and select which disk you want to insert. Since robots don't have souls to reave, you probably want to pick the disk that shuts them off. There are consumable items that will restore all of your health, and ones that will fix the armor back up to the maximum value. Those armor seals are probably the most useful recovery item in the game, so you'll want to purchase a lot of them from the armor shop. That items menu is also where you go to replay conversations with people, and that's especially useful in the police station since there are cops that will rattle off codes in strangely robotic voices.
The access code is B242. You'll need it.
Yeah, for some reason they change the codes every time you play, but this is the only level where they do that. In fact, I think this is the only level where you punch in door codes. At the armor shop, you can also purchase some additional sensor modules that will upgrade your map. These will add yellow dots for people and purple dots for items, and you activate these additional sensors in the items menu. After you acquire the jump boots in the police station, they will stay in your inventory for the rest of the game, and they're a very special item. When you activate these, you'll start hovering off the ground, and that means if there's some poisonous floor underneath you, you won't take damage from it. You can also move up and down slightly, and this will let you climb some gaps. The jump boots are a nightmare to control though, and getting through this training course is the hardest part of Cybermage. You'll fall through gaps in the floor, bounce off of things, get stuck on corners. It's not threatening, it's just very frustrating. At the end of the training course, you'll reach that prison block, and standing on top of it is the first of Necron's Legion of Doom that you'll encounter. And the first time that you face him, you are going to lose. And the second, and the third, and probably the fourth. You see, he just looks like a strong soldier who happens to be firing missiles at you. He's also in the middle of things that will just destroy you, but that's not the real problem. No, the real issue is that the Legion of Doom can only be harmed by explosives, and they have a very high health pool. So until you figure out that you have to hit them with something that goes boom, you're just going to die over and over again. Now the good news is, he's up on the roof not doing anything, so you can just go past him. It's not like he can shoot through the floor to stop you from letting all the cops out of the cells, so ignoring him and just moving on is a perfectly reasonable option. Also locked up in the cells is another rebel contact who will tell you that one of the megacorps is building a thingy, and you want that thingy. That thingy might do something good. They don't know what it does, they don't know what it is, it's just a thingy. So that'll be your next mission. You can exit the station and be back in the city. Before you head off to the megacorp, you can replenish your supplies, and you'll need to swing by the nightclub where the two women were hanging out, and they let you know that someone at another nightclub has the access card for the megacorp. You're told that you need to keep a low profile because Necrom's after you, but when you enter that next nightclub, this happens.
We've got you. I'll bet you weren't expecting this. You're the 1 millionth customer here at Liberty's.
Yeah, a weird, goofy interlude. And the woman you meet there complains that you're drawing too much attention, but nothing ever happens with it. There's no club shootout or anything like that. Okay, with the pass card in hand, we can enter the megacorp to get the thingy. And the title of this map's comic is In the Clutches of the Corporation, which is kinda bland even for this game. The megacorp map is where you're supposed to get all of the explanation on what's happening, but it doesn't seem to exist in the game. Instead, most of the key information is in the strategy guide. The corporation is the most complicated map yet, and it's the second most complex area in the game. You're trying to get access to the central core, where you can open the path to get the thingy. On the way, you'll find a message tape from Cat. Remember him from the comic? He is the guy who instructed them to put the crystal in your forehead. His long-winded message filled with unnecessary details ends right at the point when he's explaining that there are aliens. From the strategy guide, it seems that there are supposed to be several more messages, but I didn't find those while I was playing. That was probably better for me, since the messages take up 4 pages in the strategy guide. 4 pages. If all of that was read out, it would be around 15 minutes long. But continuing onward, we'll encounter one of the megacorp board members, who delivers a speech that sounds like something straight out of Deus Ex.
The corporations didn't come into power by force.
The stage progresses as you slowly get access to more and more of the facility, until you finally reach the thingy where you are confronted by a lizard guy. He tells you that the Sri Fang have been watching your Mara Tak Meng and can see that the Mana Ra is doing really well, which is why the Sri Fang made the Dom Maragan, because your Mana Ra isn't enough to overcome Necron, and they needed a weapon to stop your Mara Tak Meng. And that is what half the cutscenes in this game sound like, dragged out across several minutes, which is why I haven't been getting into them too deeply. With the battle underway for the weird helmet, I think it's finally time to explain how the superpowers in Cybermage work. All of them cost power, and you start out with a pretty small pool. there are 3 ways to restore power. First, you can swallow someone's soul, and then get the 1 in 4 chance where you get some power back. Second, you can pick up artifacts that restore 1000 power. These don't start showing up until the very late game, and they're relatively rare. Finally, you can just wait for your energy to recharge, and that is what you're going to be doing most of the time. Even at the end of the game, your maximum power is so low that it winds up being pretty inefficient to use your superpowers to fight. Throughout the entire game, you will not be able to use your strongest power more than 10 times. Whether it's at the beginning of the game when you're shooting little fireballs, or the end of the game when you're shooting, big fireballs, the costs scale up in a way that you just can't use your abilities often. And don't forget that aiming in Cybermage is awful, so you can only fire a handful of times, and it will likely take 4 or 5 shots to kill someone. No matter how delicious their soul is afterwards, you're never recovering the energy that you spent to kill them. In any of the large set-piece combats, you just won't have anywhere near enough power to deal with things. In a game titled Cybermage, your mage stuff is the least effective way to approach the game. Like I said, you start out with a puny little fireball, and there are 2 ways that you can get additional abilities. First, you can find one of those pyramid artifacts and it just gives you a new power. The second, and much easier way, is to get hit by that attack. You'll almost always encounter an enemy using an ability before you find the pyramid. You'll get zapped and then you can do it. You can even take this one step further, because some of those pyramid artifacts act as weapons shooting those abilities. And since the abilities have splash damage, you shoot a wall next to you and you've gained that ability. The other pyramid artifacts are a heal, invisibility, and invincibility. Basically all the things you're going to be saving up in your inventory until the right moment. When it comes to your powers, they basically come in 4 flavors: shots, explosions, damage over time, and damage over time in a big area. For some of the abilities, like Luna Light and Prisma, which are 2 of the higher end abilities, I couldn't find any real difference between them. My go-tos when I used the powers were Starbolt, because it was cheap and you had it from the start, Electroschism, which is also on the cheaper side, and froze enemies in place when I hit them with it, and Sci-Fire, which is an explosion whose damage was in the mid-range for the weapons. Things that left lingering damage over time effects were bad because I'd have to run into them to collect that tasty soul. The Magna Rip target often disabled targets so they dropped to the ground but didn't kill them, which just meant they got up a few seconds later when you were dealing with something else. And the Nova, well, the Nova might do the most damage, but at 50 power per shot, it is not good bang for your buck. There is one other pseudo power here, and that's when you get the thingy. It goes into your item inventory, but you can equip it and use it like a weapon, and it drains your power every time you take a shot. So just to make sure you understand, there are superpowers underneath the weapons menu, the powers menu, and the items menu. Cybermage is not a game to play if you want consistency. When you attack with the thingy, it has an area effect burst that works like a damage over time. But it has one special feature that you'll be informed of in a little bit. So getting back to exploring the corporate headquarters, it has some strange areas like this room where your powers don't work until you disable the blocker. And there's a lot of copies of the guy who helped you in the first stage, only now they throw hover bombs, and if the hover bombs hit, then that part of your armor vanishes. After you've killed the Snake Man and gotten the thingy, then you can set off the corporate headquarters self-destruct, something that every company has in their headquarters, and if you just look hard enough you can find it. With the self-destruct activated, you only have a few minutes to get out of the building. You'll have to find your way through a dark maze and activate a few switches in order to locate the escape tunnel. You make it outside and back to the city, where there's no sign of anybody else leaving the building, so everyone in the HR department is gone. While it is possible to return to the city from the next map, this is really the last time that you're going to be filtered here, and there are no more shops for the rest of the game. so you really should take this opportunity to buy up everything that you'll need. I'd actually recommend double backing to the city when you reach the point of no return, just so you can refresh all of your ammo supplies. But for things like armor repair and health packs from the hospital, you really should consider this your last opportunity. In terms of story, you shuffle around to a bunch of nightclubs again, and eventually get told that you need to fly your car to the outskirts of the city. There's an elevated passage that you can only go through with the car, and of course it's filled with vehicles that are shooting at you. If you need to fix the car up or summon it someplace, you can purchase repairs and an air car remote control from the armor shop. After you blast your way through that passage, you'll come to a door that you have to get on foot to activate, and that will take you to a war zone. Or as the comic title calls it, Dead Man's Zone. This map is the battle between the Rebels and Necrom's forces, and your path through it wanders back and forth as you fight big set-piece battles linked by small hallways. As I work my way around through these fights, let me bring up a few more issues with Cybermage that get really annoying. First, the music is awful. Okay, it's not that the music is actually awful, it's that there's a very small set of fairly generic songs, and what it plays is selected randomly. Reloading the game changes the music. Songs aren't played based on the level or the environment. It's just pick one of the 4 tracks, we'll play it. Even if the songs were better, randomly slapping them down would still make them clash. Another common irritation is how you get crushed. While there are eventually crushing traps in the game, the real problem is that doors slam shut automatically, and you take continuous damage when that occurs. It's not much damage, but it's really annoying when you're engaged in a firefight on the other side of the door. Getting back to the level, you'll work your way around to a rebel outpost where you'll finally meet up with Cat. He'll let you know that the thingy is a power neutralizer that was built to kill you, but it can stop Necrom. And give me 2 minutes because we are going to get back to that thing. Following that, you go through a few more battlefields to Necrom's base. This has an odd structure where if you do things just right, you can very slowly create a path to be able to drive tanks through the entire stage. There are 2 tanks available for you to drive, and they'll help you push through to the final base. One convenient trick about the tanks is that if you run some people over, you can then hop out of the tank to eat their souls, and then jump right back into the tank again. As you approach the end of this level, you are at the point of no return. Going through this window means you can no longer backtrack to the city. Once you're through, you are locked on the path to the end of the game. In front of that base, you are confronted by Necrom, and as he delivers his big villain speech, you can pull out the thingy and use it to neutralize his powers. Except he still has his powers, and the thingy is damaging you instead of him. And even after you hit him with the thingy, he still doesn't seem to be taking damage from anything else. So what's happening here is that the thingy is really the only effective weapon against Necrom in this particular fight. Later on, you won't need it at all. When you fire the thingy, it creates a damaging area of effect, and that shocking ball stops when it hits something. The first problem with that is that you are often in the area of effect when you shoot it, so the lightning effect just appears in front of you and that's it. It's supposed to be a ranged attack. The second problem here is that Necrom's flying, and even though it looks like you can hit him, he's really just passing over the damage area. What you have to do is activate the jump boots so you'll get off the ground, and that will both let you fire the thingy properly and consistently hit Necrom with it. It only takes a few seconds of direct attacks like this for Necrom to say, "I'll get you next time," and then flee. But until you figure out why the game is breaking and not doing what it told you it was going to do, this encounter can be a wall. Once Necrom is gone, the path is open to enter the next section of the game, and now things take a bit of a downturn. The next 2 maps are actively bad. All the nice things I've said about Cybermage's level design? Throw it out. The next 2 levels are just mazes with very little in the way of distinctive features. There are very few set pieces, no clever turnbacks. The environment design is boring. These areas feel like they needed 2 or 3 or 5 more polish passes. They don't fit the rest of the game at all. We'll start with the tunnels, which should give you a pretty good idea of where we're going. The title for the comic is What You Can't See Can Hurt You Real Bad. And in this area, you go into subways, and then into sewers, and then into caves, and then into a crypt. The only memorable thing in this level is when you open a passage and come face to face with this. These guys don't appear anywhere else in the game, and as you come in, you'll have to go, are they friendly? And no, they are not. There's not even story events in the tunnels, so there's nothing to say about them. Not even some kind of gameplay tangent. So let's move on to the next area, the gardens, which is a similar mess to the tunnels, but at least has things happening. The comic's title is Not a Good Day for a Picnic. As you might expect from it being called the Gardens, you're wandering around gardens. Your goal in this area is to find your way into the big stone temple where Necrom resides. The Gardens is the best demonstration of one of the more annoying things about playing Cybermage. Your movement gets stuck on everything. All of the sprite-based objects, like the trees here, occupy a certain radius, and your position isn't allowed to pass through that area at all. But you don't slide off and around objects like this. You just get stuck in place, and when many of them are placed close together, like they are in the garden, you really get stuck. Navigating spaces in Cybermage winds up being a lot more difficult than it should be. Even while you're dealing with the poor controls, your movement in the game stumbles. Now the good news is that areas with this kind of obstacle aren't that common. But that doesn't make them any less frustrating when you encounter them, and in the garden, you're in a maze packed with movement problems. As you progress a little bit into the garden, you'll encounter Earth Mother again. Remember, she's the first person you encountered back in the very first stage? Don't worry, she knows that it's been over 10 hours since you talked to her, so she introduces herself and all of her concepts again. The important takeaway here is that there's a Fire Mother to go along with Earth Mother, and Fire Mother is helping out Necrom. As you reach the temple structure, you'll start encountering cultists, and these become the primary enemy for the rest of the game. Rather than weapons, these guys shoot powers, just like you have. Because a lot of these are area effect attacks, they wind up killing themselves and their friends a lot. Friendly fire is on in Cybermage. After a bit of puzzle solving and key hunting, plus encounters with the nearly invisible specters that are the strongest non-boss enemies in the game, we arrive at the big set-piece battle that makes up the end of the area. This big courtyard is packed with Legion of Doom firing rockets from above, and an army of cultists bombarding you from all directions. And the path to get through it is one of the most ridiculously elaborate things you have to do in the game. It's almost better to kill everything from ground level, even though you're missing out on the souls, just so that you won't have to deal with it as you run through everything else. Are you ready? Here's the path that you have to take from the entrance to the exit. You climb up some steps and emerge into the courtyard, turn right and run across the entire thing to another set of steps going down and underground. You ride a long elevator up to the balcony of a building, turn around immediately and go back inside, hang an immediate left and go to the end of the hall to another balcony, jump from that balcony to a roof covering a fountain area. The fountain very slowly heals you if you get into the water. Then jump from that roof to another balcony, duck back inside and follow this long hallway in a loop around the courtyard until you're back at the central building and a wall lowers to become an elevator. Take the elevator up to the higher roof, then jump across to the opposite side of the roof where you can take an elevator back down. There you turn left and you'll find the switch that opens the path to the level exit. If you fell off at any point with all that platforming, you get to start at the beginning again. Now, just because you've hit that switch doesn't mean you know where the level exit is, because what the switch did was it turned on an elevator in a wall. It's now opening and closing a hole every few seconds that's too high off the ground for you to reach. So what you have to do is use an icon of flight, one of the magic pyramids that you hopefully found while exploring the rest of the level. Now you can fly yourself around, get through that gap, and then give up your flight in order to access the level exit. This is the final challenging combat sequence of the game, and it hits you pretty hard. But now we can move on to the final proper level. The comic gives it the title, Now I Know Why People Pray, and considering Cybermage is in the foreground, I'm going to guess that woman is at least 3 meters tall. Probably closer to 4, since a superhero is going to be pretty tall to begin with. We're going from the worst levels in the game to the best. The temple is the most intricately designed area in Cybermage. The temple is filled with traps, puzzles, enough key hunts for 3 first-person shooters. It's just a huge environment to explore. In the temple, you'll encounter Fire Mother, who first wants to test you by casting fireballs at you. And then after you drive her off in that encounter, you'll find her again much later, where she'll decide that she wants you rather than Necrom. Fire Mother also lets you know that Necrom has his own thingy that will drain you and prevent him from taking damage. The other big plot beat that you'll encounter as you explore the temple are the snake people also turning against Necrom. They'd much rather help you destroy him than continue to work for him. So once you're done with things like clearing out the prison cells, solving the teleport maze, and looting Necrom's bedroom, you'll encounter a hole in the floor that will take you to the final battle. And of course the comic here is titled The Showdown. This final level is just an arena for a boss fight and a few side areas to get you more equipment if you started to run low. It's nothing special, but then it also doesn't really need to be. It is the final boss after all. You mainly just want it to be a good place for a fight. When you first encounter Necrom here, he'll have his own glowing ghost thing, and that shields him while it hurts you. What you have to do is jump into the middle of it and suck up the bad ghost. Once that's gone, Necrom runs away, which gives you an opportunity to explore a little bit around the arena and refresh your armor and ammo. Then when you're ready to fight, you just pound on him. It's a first-person shooter from 1995. The bosses that aren't just damage rushes are rare. I tried using the thingy on him in the final battle, but it doesn't seem to have been especially effective here. At least not as much as just shooting him in the face with the heavy blaster. Once you pump enough damage into Necrom, he explodes, leaving his gem behind, although the gem leaves on its own. The ending doesn't kick off until you go through a teleporter that opens up after Necrom's dead. The ending lets you know that you have fixed everything, but darkness may rise again. And then we end with Necrom's crystal being snatched by Fire Mother, and then we're dumped to a DOS prompt, exiting the game on a sequel hook that never gets resolved. As I mentioned, D.W. Bradley and Warren Spector don't work with Origin again after this. Spector starts his own studio, which becomes a branch of Ion Storm, and he releases Deus Ex. The game whose title is so powerful that by saying it this many times in the video, I have caused at least a dozen people to reinstall it and play it again. D.W. Bradley's career after this point is less illustrious. Yes, even if we include Epic Mickey as part of Spector's legacy. Bradley would go on to make only 2 games after Cybermage. Wizards and Warriors entered development immediately after Cybermage, and then didn't come out until 2000, and that is not a game that inspires people to reinstall it when its name is spoken. Wizards and Warriors was followed by Dungeon Lords, a game that was a notorious mess. I've never installed my copy, and I probably never will, since I'm not going to install it for this video. Cybermage was a pretty significant flop when it was released, but could it have been saved? Well, it was definitely pushed out the door too early. Another 3 months of development wouldn't have helped sales. Duke Nukem 3D was released just a few weeks after Cybermage, and that was a game that shifted the whole conversation around first-person shooters. Another 3 months of development on Cybermage would have put it squarely in the crosshairs of Quake. And if Cybermage looks a little backward now, just picture it going up against that. No, if Cybermage could have been a success, then it really needed to be worked from the other end. A smaller scale, less ambitious project that could have been out at the beginning of 1995 rather than for Christmas. I don't have enough information about Cybermage's development to say what cost them all of that time. But the strengths of Cybermage were in its level and environmental design, and I feel like that is something that could have fit into a shorter period if the engine and gameplay features were locked in early enough. It still would have been a tough sell, but maybe, just maybe, they could have gotten it over the hump. Cybermage was one of those games that existed right on the edge. It's packed with ambitious features and forward-looking ideas about storytelling in games, and yet not implemented well enough to make an impact. At the same time, it was falling behind technologically, but was just before the point where it would look hopelessly outdated. Cybermage is a perfect example of a game where ambition exceeded its reach. And while that might mean it's not very fun to play these days, it does make for a very interesting game.